when we say that the body fluctuates, that it's never at rest, this has behind a deeper cosmological kind of truth, so to speak, or principle, which I take from quantum field theory, the idea that even in vacuum, even before the universe started, there is always fluctuation. There is always an indeterminate variation of energy density from which the universe unfolds. Now, this doesn't mean that fluctuation is pure randomness. I want to start right away by challenging this idea of pure disorder. There is never pure disorder in nature, just like there is never pure order. So geometers will tell us that, yes, that pure straight lines are inexistent in nature. They are a mathematical abstraction, a chimera. We believe in them because we have homogenized our perceptions. But even as we draw them, they will never be absolutely what they claim to be as an absolutely perfect form. This comes from Plato in a way, this ideality of pure forms, which geometry and mathematics are a kind of, well, intermediate realm from which we can kind of behold the forms. But this is never the case, right? You don't find these forms in yourself or anywhere. They are supposed to be maybe forms of thought, but even this would perhaps be questionable. I think it's more of a belief. But there's another equally problematic belief in pure disorder. This comes more from, well, it also has its roots in Plato, of course, in this dualism of pure forms and the disorderly world of the senses, on which forms try to express themselves, always imperfectly, right? But our modern conception of disorder comes more from thermodynamics and entropy. So in industrial society there was this attempt to create closed thermodynamic systems, closed systems to create heat with the steam engine, which underlies industrial society. And so there was an intense attempt to create closed systems. And the result, paradoxically, was that when you try to create a closed system, dissipation happens. So the idea of entropy as dissipation, as tendency to disorder, to eradication of all differentials, is actually an effect of trying to create a closed system, but the universe is not a closed system, precisely because of fluctuation, right? And of how energy recirculates. So in this context of thermodynamics, we also have Darwin coming up and so forth, and so we have this strange idea that life is a kind of heroic struggle against entropy. It's a negentropic force that brings order in this tendency of the universe to disorder. I think this is a very problematic belief, cultural belief, that has its roots back in Plato at least. I think that instead we can create a positive account of how fluctuation is never pure randomness. It's about indeterminate differentials, but always different kinds of differentials, that will create new regions of differentials within regions and across regions. And that's how the universe unfolds in its tendency to variation. So I claim that fluctuation underlies this deeply physical kind of principle. It's not so much a will to power, but a will to variation, within which, however, sometimes closed bubbles come up. Tendencies to closure, tendencies to reduction. But this happens within a broader principle of variation. I think biodiversity on Earth is an extraordinary expression of this will to variation that bacteria mostly have enacted. But then within that we have, events like certain dominant human cultures, which are expressions of nature, but reductive ones, which are creating massive destruction instead in a very short period of time. It's not about making a black and white assumption about human cultures versus others, but we need to understand certain tendencies coming up. But this is not in a kind of universal dualism between a pure order and a pure disorder. No, nature is always unfolding in a will to variation to a certain extent. It's never a movement of pure order, never a movement of pure disorder. But within it, the problem comes actually when you try to impose too much of an order. So this type of cultural thrust, stemming mostly from Plato, and then with the more recent kind of take of thermodynamics and so forth, to try to instill order, hard order, because we have this fear of disorder. This is a fundamental cultural assumption that I think we need to question and undo, because it's precisely when you try to inflict and impose an order that dissipation will happen. So dissipation and pure disorder is more of an effect of trying to impose hard orders that are actually disrupting the metastable dances of evolution as movement of variation, as unfolding of fluctuation. So instead of building upon this fear of disorder, which is what digital culture does with this paranoia and obsession with control, this fear, so we all constantly have people invoking the sort of universal need of the human to have control and security and so forth. I think this is a very problematic and pathological cultural condition that we need to question, which has as its underlying kind of myth this chaos or order dualism. So that's why I want to claim the ancient etymology of chaos. Chaos, in its ancient etymology, as we find it, for example, in Hesiod's Theogony, it's not at all disorder. It's more like an originary opening. It has to do etymologically with chascho, yawning. So it's this kind of primordial interval, spacing, which can be a differentiation, separation, or spacing, opening. Right? A yawning cave, an abyss, an opening. And this, for me, relates a lot with this movement of variation, that fluctuation unfolds. I want to claim this in face of this tendency to invoke always this dualism of the pure order versus the pure disorder. No, disorder and dissipation will come as an effect of trying to block fluctuations. What we need is to move with fluctuation and taking further its movement of variation. And the best, the most extraordinary tool that we all have at hand, if we want, is in our own proprioception, this field of movement of the bodies, whose capacity to vary has been neglected precisely by a culture inflicting and imposing increasing reduction and atrophy on that capacity by invoking these phantoms of order and disorder. So let's undo the phantom of entropy and the fear of entropy, the entropic fear, I call it. Let's undo the entropic fear that underlies so many authoritarian and thrusts to absolute control in current society. Let's bring back the capacity to vary through our movement.